Hey everybody. So I'm just pulling up some um information that I wanted to kind of go over tonight with you guys. So um give me 1 second. Okay, while I'm waiting for this one page to load, um this week, like I told you guys last week when we kind of like flashed forward to this week, it's not a whole lot of news coming out this week. A lot of the news that's coming out this week has to deal with um, unsettled things. So things like the election, the runoff election in Georgia, the coronavirus case count, coronavirus vaccine, um, and then just trying to wrap up the year, get ready to go into 2021. So there are, as you become more familiar with the markets and how the markets work, you'll become um, very familiar with the cycles, how everything flows throughout the year, when are the down moments, when are the very volatile moments. Um, so this is one of those times of the year where um, if it's an election year, it varies, but normally this is the time of the year where most traders are just kind of chilling. I see in a lot of groups and a lot of people who post, they're still trying to get like all these pips out of the market. And don't get me wrong, you can still get pips out of the market, but don't expect December pippage to be the same as, let's say, um, like June through September, because it's not definitely not going to be the same. So I want you guys to always take that into consideration. That's one of the reasons why one of the mottos we use is once it's blue, it's on you, because this is one of those times of the year where you definitely don't want to sit back and wait for a TP to get hit. Because TPs might not get hit, and because there's not a lot of volatility in the market, um, all it takes, especially now, is a news item to flip the market in either direction. Um, so just be careful when you're in the market. I am going to go ahead and share my screen. We'll go over the Forex Factory calendar. We'll also talk about some other news that I know some of you might be interested in, as far as like the IPO calendar for this week. So, okay, so we're going to cover the Forex Factory calendar first, like I said. So, most of this news has already happened. Um, Typically, especially lately, I don't go over the current day news unless it's just something major. I'll just push forward. So if you guys ever have questions about news or something that I didn't cover that's on the calendar and you want to know how it affects the markets or something that you've heard about, drop it in the group chat or you can ask at the end of the Zoom call and I'll cover it. We're looking forward to tomorrow. We have an Italian holiday, which is going to slightly affect the EU. The EU is still going to trade. It's still going to trade at pretty much the same level of volatility because it's just the Italian banks that's closed tomorrow. We have the European economic sentiment that's coming out, and um, bonds, bonds for the GBP. So I pointed those things out. And one thing I want you guys to note is that there are a lot of items here that are yellow. Typically, if you scroll back through the year, a lot of times these items would be red or orange. These items are yellow right now because when you think back to everything that has happened with COVID, a lot of governments have had to put out plans ahead of time. They've had to do a lot of forward planning, a lot of forward thinking. They've had to put forward a lot of forward guidance. So when a country and when a government does that, um, a lot of the news items that typically would make the markets move don't make the markets move anymore because you already know because the government told you like several months ago what was going to happen. So this is why listening to the news, reading the news is very important because a lot of people would look at these and say, well, these aren't important news items. They are important. It's just that we've already heard what's going to happen. So whenever you see things like economic sentiments, so typically the euro economic sentiment would be like mm, red. Germany's would be orange. Um, one of the GDPs, like these are typically either yellow or orange. Bonds are typically orange, especially during this time of the year when banks are kind of wrapping up the year and a lot of the sentiment things. So when you see anything related to a sentiment and then unemployment rate, those things are typically either orange or red. So, um, if you go back all those times where I'm like, oh, Christine Lagarde is speaking, um, that is going to be, she's going to be talking about the Euro economic sentiment. So when we start talking about leaders' speeches, when I tell you guys to go back and read these speeches, go back and read the speeches because it's literally going to tell you everything you need to know. And then it's also probably going to help you to think forward about your trading plan, especially if you're a long term trader. If you pull up a chart like GBP USD, and I know this one because I've traded based on it. If it hits record or all time lows or a historic low, and it's having a really hard time breaking through that, and news is telling you that it's possible for the GBP to continue to be bullish against the or to be bullish against the US and not bearish anymore, um, that's a perfect time to get in and just ride it for months. And add trades every time it pulls back. And then there you go. You have a trade set up there solely based off news and then a solid technical structure as well. Um, so just make sure you keep that in mind whenever we're talking about news. When I tell you someone's speaking, someone's releasing some type of news. If you don't know how that might correlate, just ask because that's the whole purpose of me doing this session. Wednesday, the biggest news items we have coming out are the bank rates. As I told you guys earlier this year, when the banks started giving out stimulus and when they started changing bank rates, I told you it was going to get to a point where the banks weren't going to change rates anymore. They weren't going to change rates because A, they needed to make sure that all the measures they had already taken were working. And then you don't want to put yourself in a position where you've lowered your rates so much that should your country get in trouble, you have nowhere to go but negative. So, um, 0.25 or 25 basis points is typically the lowest a government will go, and it's typically the lowest you will see here because really it's a range. Really, the range should be 0.10 to 0.25. That's what it should say, but they typically just record the upper rate. If this was zero point 0.1, then the true range would be 0 to 0.10%. So I don't expect that Canada is going to change their rates. I don't suspect that any country is going to change their rates until we've completely gotten through COVID. And when I say we've completely gotten through COVID, I mean we don't have a lot of cases. By a lot of cases, I mean we're not increasing in cases, and that means by the month, the week, and the day. So we have to get down to where we don't have any increased cases by the day. Um, for government's sake, they have to make sure that there's a rollout of the vaccine, whether people like it or not. That's prerogative. But for the government's sake, for the sake of the economy, for the sake of how the government structure is going to look at, are we out of COVID yet? They're going to be looking at vaccines. They're going to be looking at how many doses have been given. They're going to be looking at the number of cases. Then they're going to start looking at jobs. They're going to start looking at, is travel back? For Canada, they're going to be looking at, are we starting to export more oil again? Are we getting back to our quote unquote baseline for pre-COVID levels of oil exports? Um, the US as well. So it's going to take a lot of looking at what it was like pre-COVID, what it's like now, and then also trying to figure out what's going on with COVID, because COVID is the um, biggest factor. Anytime you're looking at news, there's always going to be a factor somewhere that's playing a part. You just have to figure out what the factor is. Um, so Wednesday, we'll also get oil inventories. Depending on the week, we get oil inventories on Wednesday, but normally it's a Wednesday or a Thursday thing. Um, Thursday, we do have a little bit of mid to high impact news. So the refinancing rate for the euros coming out. We have a Euro press conference. We have CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index numbers coming out for the US. And then we also have unemployment claims. So these are really big news items that are coming out at 8:45 and at 9:30. 8:45 is within that window of time that's right before the New York session opens. London will already be open. So markets tend to start getting very volatile around 8:30 in the morning, because New York is going to be opening up pretty soon. So when this news comes out on Thursday, if you're planning to trade or if you're in trades, just make sure you're paying attention to your EU. And then at 9:30, make sure you're paying attention, because the euro, USD, and then all of the USD derivatives, so like indices, gold, um, silver, all of those things are going to start moving based on this news, because it's coming out right when the market opens. It's IPO day, and it's economic news that's going to be impacting the market. So just make sure you're aware of everything that's coming out Thursday. Um, just to kind of give you a little bit of what's coming out at 9:30. Press conference. The core CPI and the CPI is one of the ways that we measure and look at inflation. If you guys remember earlier this year, Jerome Powell said that they were willing to let the economy run hot. They are definitely letting the economy run hot. And what that means is they're willing to push the boundaries of inflation. So they're willing to let inflation kind of expand and increase um, beyond what the level of the consumer can handle, um, for a while, to try to, um, it's a way of jump starting, or it's a way of seeing like how far you can push the economy. So if you go to the store, if you're looking at gas prices, those things are increased. Those things are a little bit higher right now. Um, and a lot of people would say, well, why not make prices cheaper so that you can, why not make prices cheaper for the consumer so that the consumer can spend more and they can kind of start the economy that way? Well, in times like this, that's not how people think. Um, Most of the time in situations like this, even though people say they would spend money if prices were cheaper, the numbers don't show that. The numbers show that savings accounts in the United States over time, and this has been something they've studied for years and decades, whenever there's trouble, people tend to save, people tend to be very frugal. They don't want to spend a lot of money because they're very unsure and uncertain. So that's where consumer sentiment and consumer confidence comes from whenever we look at those numbers here. So um, people tend to hoard money, so they don't spend it. So whenever people do go out to spend now, if prices are higher, okay, so what, prices are higher, and the thought process behind it is people aren't going to necessarily notice 10 cent unless you roll over to the next dollar figure. And if you roll over to the next dollar figure, you need to be far enough into that dollar figure that it's not noticed. So if you're used to going to the store and you see an item that's $1.79, and then you go back to the store, let's say a couple of weeks later, and it's $1.89, you might not notice that 10 cent. But if that item goes from 179 to like 209, you'll be like, 209? Like, I remember when it was 179. But if you go a little bit further, like 239 instead of 209, most people tend to not really notice it. And even if people do notice it, it's far enough into the next dollar figure where psychologically people don't see it as a complete dollar increase and it's not really noticed. It's psychology with pricing that they use in economy. So when we look at the numbers on Friday for Thursday, um, we'll look at consumer price index. We'll actually go through all the prices and look at them, see how much things have changed. And we'll kind of actually, well, not kind of, we will go over, um, how prices have changed with items. And you'll see where people will buy items and will go out and spend money buying items that might be 10% more in price. Um, Whereas, if it's cheaper, they might not buy it. And if they do buy it, you're not really putting a lot of money into the economy because it's still that scarcity mindset. Unemployment claims. So it's already predicted that unemployment claims are going to go up. Um, this is because a lot of states have shut down again, going back to phase one or phase zero because of COVID. So since that's the case, your businesses that were the first to shut down in February and March and into April, those are some of the companies and some of the industries now that are being hit again. So travel, restaurant and bar industry are like the very first industries to get hit this time around. Um, so we'll be taking a look at those numbers and just truly seeing which industries are being hit again, because it will actually give us a weekly breakdown and it'll give us a breakdown by industry, sex, race, um, demographic. Like it'll give us like all the demographic breakdowns. So we'll look at that. And then Friday, um, let's see. Friday we have core PPI, which is the purchaser price index. So whenever we look at that number, this is going to be, instead of looking at the consumer and what they're paying, we're going to be looking at the company and how much they're paying. Um, and I hit more. It pulled up next week's calendar. Next week, we have a lot of news coming out next week. There's so much news coming out next week. It's like the last major week for news. Um, One of the biggest things next week that we have coming out is the FOMC. So Jerome Powell has a ton of news coming out next week. And then we also get a Treasury report coming out also. Um, but I'll cover more of that like on Wednesday and Friday. One of the other things I wanted to note before I switched over and just showed the IPO calendar really quick is that Friday, if the government can't come to some compromise, they call this a lame duck session, but we got so much stuff going on that Congress has had to come back from their recess to help get through a lot of the issues we have going on. But if they can't come to a compromise and like a deal, the government runs out of money on Friday, FYI, which means that government spending will come to a halt. Government employees' pay will come to a halt. Yes, that happens outside of October. Because everybody typically knows about the budget fight that happens in October, um, and how they do government shutdowns. But what a lot of people don't realize is that government spending was only extended out to the 11th, and then unemployment benefits end completely. So the extended unemployment benefits from the CARES Act, they or in the extended CARES Act, they end on the 31st. So there's a lot of work that has to be done in the next like 23, 24 days. And not even all of those days because a lot of those days are government holiday days. Um, but just switching over to the IPO calendar really quick. So there's plenty of sites you can use to see what IPOs are coming up. These are the ones that have already been scheduled. Paperwork has to be submitted before you can end up on this calendar. So I just went to Market Watch. It's just one of the places I go to. The biggest IPO that people are waiting for, been waiting for ever since last year, is Airbnb. They had to go back and correct their valuation again today. So the opening price was supposed to be about $40 to $50. Now the opening price is going to be between $56 and $60, and that very well could change again depending on underwriting and investing between now and then. DoorDash is another one. DoorDash IPO right now is anticipated, or their opening price is anticipated to be between $90 and $95 per share whenever they open up. So just make sure you guys are, if you're into stocks, if you want to trade IPOs, just make sure you're paying attention to the IPO calendar. Also, Wish is another place, another site that people use to buy items. Their IPO is going to be next week. So anyway, the IPO calendar is up here. If you're not, if you don't have the capital in your brokerage account, like an actual stock brokerage account, and the approvals to trade IPOs prior to their release. One thing I will say is be careful. Make sure you go through and research the company before you jump in right at the opening bell, because some of these companies have done what's called like a direct listing, which means that they don't have to go through the traditional channels of having a lockup period on their stocks. If you don't know what that means, drop it in the Telegram group chat or in the Zoom group chat, and I'll explain what it means in like a little short video later on, or cover it on the next Zoom call. But if the company doesn't have a lockup period, then people can be shorting that stock as soon as it opens. So you're going to buy it thinking that this stock is going to go up, and people can be ready to short the stock in anticipation that everybody's going to buy. So make sure you know if it's a traditional IPO or if it was a direct listing or if they chose some other way to get listed, because you don't want to get trapped in, thinking that something's going to boom on this first day and then it tanks. Um, but anyway, that's all I have for you guys. Thanks for listening. I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Level so he can get started with the technicals.
Cool beans. Great information as always, Corman. Appreciate you so much. Appreciate you a lot.